Jon Schaefer from Berkshire East and Catamount ski area, and I'd like to welcome Stuart Winchester from the Storm Skiing Journal and podcast, and try to flip the tables on him a little bit. We've talked a few times, and we've texted and maybe exchanged some emails, but I've found his podcasting and writing to be very informative, very witty. You can tell that there's a couple of layers beneath the words that come out. It's just not print type on paper or digitized screens, that there's some thought and effort that goes into it. And I have a ton of respect for what you've been writing and saying. Some of it's been complimentary of what we've been up to. Some of it, there's critiques or comparisons to other places in the industry. And I like the candid views in the writing. So, it's mid-May. It's not the ski season, but I think somebody like Stuart has a tremendous amount of views and probably information that'll be interesting to not only me, but hopefully you all as well. So welcome, Stuart.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate all that. And I've really found, and I found this last summer, a lot of what I write about and what I care about, which is the development of lift serve skiing. A lot of it takes place in the off season, because during the season, you guys are running your mountains. It's really hard to nail down a GM or someone running a mountain in January as they're getting ready for MLK weekend or December or February. But, as the spring comes along and you start announcing lift projects and there's new appointments and the passes come out, that's when all the stuff that I'm most interested in happens. So there's a lot happening right now. I've not had the need to slow down because it's May at all.
Yeah. We run really 2 or 3 different businesses, probably a lot more than that, but I always say it's a construction business and a sales team. And sometimes you can walk into a ski area and this is just the wave tops, but you can see whether they've been focused too much on sales and not enough on construction, or too much on construction and not enough on sales. And a lot of how I viewed my role at Berkshire the last decade, or Catamount, is that construction manager. And, now we're focusing more on the other side of things.
Yeah, how much of that is just, John, because you, as I've written about before, you grew up with this. And you, what was that like growing up at Berkshire East? I don't think you can probably imagine a world without that, right?
It's weird. It's great, right? Like everybody, being the owner's kid of a ski area is a fun thing. And yeah, you get free French fries and jelly donuts or whatever. And you get to cut the lift line sometimes, though my dad would never let us do it. And, you didn't get your pass clipped. At the same time, there's the stress of, when I was a kid in the early 80s, sort of the rise of snowmaking. So the snowmaking systems were not quite optimized yet. And, it's a big deal when Christmas week, your pumps fail and you're 3 years old. Your dad hasn't slept in days, and that's stress that sort of permeates the family. So I grew up in motor rooms and pump rooms, riding in snowcats, and it is my life. And it's not life or death. There's a lot of life or death things going on in the world right now, but it's hardwired into me. The pace of the ski season, the stresses of the ski season, and it is literally what we do.
I mean, you've learned a lot from watching your dad and growing up, it seems like, but you also kicked the thing into the modern era, right? You've really changed Berkshire East since you took it over. So how much of what you've done and what you're doing is just sort of through osmosis of just growing up around it, and how much of it is sort of deliberate study of, hey, look, Dad, this is the way that the ski industry is going. You set us up with a great foundation, but we have to blow this thing out to 4 seasons. We have to pump our snowmaking. We have to do expansions. We should move on, expand into other mountains. Like how did you grow into making this kind of little conglomerate you have, what it is today, from this one ski hill where you were just, your dad was struggling with snowmaking and trying to get it to work and coming up and suddenly making into this very stable, that's the what I feel like it from the outside, business that's growing and expanding, and really it seems to be doing everything right.
A lot of effort, a huge financial commitment under my brother Jim, who I'm partners with, and a lot of work, a lot of experience from our ski racing background of being able to travel the world and being in great communities. So much of what we do is, it's not just on the slopes, it's in the town, it's in the type of person that recreates at our mountains. So when you go to, say, you live in New Zealand for 3 months and then you come home to Charlemont, well, honestly, it's not the Southern Alps, it's not Fjordland, and we don't get 500 inches of snow a year. But our hometowns in Western Mass and the ski community, wherever it is in the world, generally produces people that end up going to places like New Zealand. So there's the roots of that adventure sport foundation here in our hometowns. So we've tried to tap into that and try to make that appealing for others. And then on the mountain proper, I'd say it's 50-50. My dad's always chirping in my ear, whether in person or just hardwired in, about how to keep a small business alive, like a small farm. But then also there's the growth aspect too, which is, you identified, we're 10 years in to a regrowth of Berkshire East and 3 or 4 at Catamount. But it's really a 55, 60, 70-year-old business. So we're running these startups on top of pre-existing businesses, and those come with their own challenges. And that took a lot of research, time, effort. I live this 24 hours a day, 365. And it's osmosis, it's hard work, it's communicating as much as possible with our community. Likewise, how did you end up here? You're a great writer, you're passionate about the ski industry, and where are you coming from?
Yeah, I'll say, first of all, I have a full-time job, and this is not it, right? So this is something that I'm doing on the side. I went to journalism school and took a left turn into corporate communications. And so that's where I ended up, and sort of internal marketing for these big companies in New York City. And it's interesting work. It's cool to have the inside view of how these large companies operate. I worked for 5 years at the NBA. The National Basketball Association has its headquarters in New York. And that was cool, traveling for finals and All-Star game and going all over the country. But it's a specific kind of writing, right? It's business writing, and you're writing someone else's ideas. I needed some kind of outlet, and in order to be successful with some kind of outlet, it has to be something you know a lot about and have a lot of opinions about. Skiing is something I've always wanted to write more about. I came up in when I first started skiing, it was all magazines, right? They kind of defined the ski culture. And what I found was, over time, the magazines really shifted their focus away from the resort experience. And that's what I care about. Like, I'm too lazy to do backcountry. I don't have the experience. I don't have the gear. It can be really dangerous. I like getting on a lift, riding up the hill, skiing down an interesting mountain. And back in the 90s, Skiing Magazine would do all kinds of cool stuff. I remember one story they did. They sent 2 authors to Killington for a whole year, and that was one story. They just did a whole season of Killington. Or they plop someone in Mad River Glen for a week and get to know the locals. And over time, they kind of got away from that. They got into this, let's send a writer and a photographer and a videographer with like all-star skier who goes and jumps off 200-foot cliffs and does like 5 backflips doing it in the Himalayas or something crazy. And that's super cool in doses. But sometimes I just want to read about Catamount. And no one was really doing that anymore. Like the ski media had just gotten to this point where it was so detached from the experience of 99.9% of skiers that it was not relatable. So there was a gap. There's a gap in the marketplace. The ski media also did not do a great job of adjusting to digital, right? It's they're very focused on imagery, photography, rightfully so. This stuff's great, but there was two kinds of ski media. There was that sort of adventure writing, and there's the very straightforward, basically like rewriting a press release. Like, Vail released epic passes. They cost $500. Here's the 5 mountains you can ski on them, or whatever. Yep. There was no one doing kind of analysis, and that's what I'm interested in, right? So I've worked a lot in sports and entertainment, and there's a big chunk of media in both of those things that breaks down every single move that they make. So if when I was working at the NBA, there would when LeBron went, I was there when LeBron went to Miami. I mean, forget it. There was hundreds and hundreds of stories written about it. When Vail bought Peak Resorts, that was a huge story. It was one of the biggest changes in Northeast skiing in decades, and it had huge ramifications. I could only find a handful of stories, one of which was written by a writer at Forbes who covers this kind of stuff a lot. It actually took like a critical look at this and what it meant for the Northeast, what it meant for Northeast skiers. And I said, God, no one's doing this. There's a market for that kind of writing because people are doing it in every industry. No one's doing it in skiing. It's here and there, but no one's doing it consistently. So I decided to give it a try, and slowly build up the audience. There are a lot of good ski podcasts. So one side of it is sort of the journal, right, and the other side is the podcast. And I found myself having all these questions when I was riding up lifts of these mountains. I'm like, why'd they take out this lift? Sugarbush used to have a top to bottom gondola. Why don't they anymore? And I couldn't find the answers anywhere. And I still have these texts. I was at Mad River Glen a couple of years ago. This was in March of 2019. I was texting with my wife. I'm like, I think I'm going to start a podcast where I interview people who run ski mountains, because all the podcasts that I can find on skiing, they're interviewing like famous skiers, which is fine, but no one, like, again, they're hard to relate to for me. I'm not jumping off a 100-foot cliff, not in this lifetime, right? So I wanted to talk to the guys like you who are making these decisions, and most skiers are like me. They're just wondering why decisions are made the way they are, and they don't really understand. And I figured that I wasn't the only one having these questions. So decided to start the podcast and the newsletter sort of in tandem, with the hope that if I could get some interviews on the podcast, that would drive signups to the newsletter. And that's exactly what happened. What I found, John, and this is a testament to the industry as a whole, is that I was amazed with how easy it was to get access to these people. Yeah. First interview I released was Killington General Manager Mike Salamano. Like, imagine that this guy's running the busiest mountain in the eastern United States. I don't know if they get 1 million skier visits a year, but they get a lot. You've been to Killington; it's a madhouse. Yep. Why is this guy going to take an hour out of his day to talk to a guy no one's ever heard of for a podcast that isn't even launched yet? But he did. And because he did, and because Stephen Kircher did, and because some other folks did before it was even live, I was able to kind of get a little bit of momentum and get it going. So that's where it came from.
I'm not going to say that ski area managers are conversationalists, but as you grow up in the industry, you have your behind the scenes work, make snow at night, do your job. And then at 9 a.m., the lifts turn on and you walk out in front and talk to people. I grew up with my dad holding court for hours, and some of these mountains are run by personalities, as they were formed and created and run for generations. It's just an extension of that. My assumption is all those guys, however they came through the ski world, they've been it in their entire life. And you talk on ski lifts, and so much of the decision making happens inside your community. So I know for me, I have a core group of skiers or just random people. I'll hop on a lift and say, what do you think if we cut these trees out? What do you think if we added snowmaking over here? And they'll give me an honest answer. So I'm not surprised that the ski area managers have been very open and willing to communicate with you. But I also think that you've, definitely in the written word, done a really good job of pushing it out there and then adding a really good twist to each one of your sentences. And I can see the intent and the way you try to go. So what's your home mountain? You're from Michigan originally, correct?
Yep, that's right. I grew up in Michigan. I did not ski until I didn't try it till I was 14.
Yep.
And my school started running these buses up to this little place called Mott Mountain. It's 200 vertical feet. It was, I think the lift ticket was $6 and the rental was $6 or something like that. And I couldn't even make it to the rope tow without falling several times. It was a mess. But then I tried it again a couple years later at another little rinky-dink place called Snowmaking, which is still there. Mott Mountain's out of business.
Yep.
And I think by the time I was 16, I'd kind of grown into my body a little, and I was not so awkward. And I was able to just go down the hill, straight line, without falling. And that's when I really caught the bug. Asked for skis for the next Christmas, and then just explored. There's so many ski areas in Michigan. It has the second most after New York State. At the time in the 90s, it had around 50. Now it has, I think, 40. But just bounced around, and it's a very strong ski culture out there. And there's a number of pretty, they're not big, but they're big enough. They're 500 vertical feet, and that's enough to get some turns and feel like you're having a run. That's where Boyne is based. Boyne Mountain and Boyne Highlands are their flagships.
Where my dad started.
Yeah. Your dad started there, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I just spent a lot of time skiing around Michigan, up in the Lower Peninsula, went to Colorado a couple times. Then I moved to New York in 2002. And for me, so I think this is part of why my point of view on the Northeast is so positive. Because I know so many people in New York City who only ski out west. For me, coming from the Midwest, I mean, my God, the mountains out here are so much bigger. You have great vertical drops. You get a ton of snow, especially if you get up into the spine of Vermont. It's so much fun, and there's so many ski areas. I do have a home mountain, which is Mountain Creek. Season pass is super cheap. It's about an hour and 15 minutes from my house. It's a place that gets a bad rap. I think that's fair, but I think people don't know how to approach it. I think it's big. It's got 1,000 feet of vertical. It's got high speed lifts because IntraWest owned it for a while. Yep. They really, snow operating really knows what they're doing. If you go on a weekday or you go weekends from 8 to 11, it's fine. You get your turns in. The days when I can't make it to the Catskills, can't make it to Vermont, I can go over to Mountain Creek for 2-3 hours. It's great. The season pass was $230 last year. I mean, it's that model of that volume model. And yeah, the place is nuts. It's filled with knuckleheads, but welcome to New Jersey. I mean, you know what you're getting when you go there, but you got to know how to work the mountain. It's like any place else. I mean, you ski it all around. You know how it is. But yeah, now I just ski all over the Northeast. I try to try a lot of the little places. I do like the Epic and Icon passes. I typically have them, and I'll go to those big mountains too, and I like them. But on weekends, you're not going to find me at Killington.
I always appreciated that you landed on the Indies. Not only did you bring focus to our mountains, but others as well. So I think you're an equal opportunity journalist, which is not always the case. And you sort of pointed that out with the ski magazines. Historically, there's been a healthy dose of jealousy between the haves and have-nots in the industry in terms of coverage. And I mean, the open secret is a lot of that's paid journalism as well in terms of marketing. So you've provided a nice insight in not only to the operations and the personalities, but also, forthright with your own opinions about where you're at and where you're visiting. What what are ski area managers missing in terms of what are skiers trying to tell ski areas that they're not hearing?
I think the market is pretty clearly telling ski areas that skiers expect a lot more out of their passes than they're getting. In some cases, the era of the single mountain season pass is over.
Mm-hmm.
So some people haven't gotten the memo yet, and you can still get away with it if you have a certain set of circumstances. If you have 300 condos at the base of your mountain, you know that every single person who owns one of those condos is going to buy multiple season passes, and you can get away with that and having the $1,000 season pass that's just for your mountain, but that's not a growth strategy, right? I think that, well, the example I always use is Berkshire East is you bought Catamount and folded them into one pass, right? Mm-hmm. So now skiers have options. Now, I don't know how many times Berkshire East skiers, I don't know if they're interested in Catamount. I don't know if people go from Catamount. I don't know. You know that. You see the data. But that was one part of it. And the other part of it is the Indy Pass partnership, right? You had an Indy Pass onto your Summit Pass for $189. For less than $700, you now have access to 67 mountains, right? If you include Biscay.
Yeah, it's great for us.
Yeah, and I think that between the Indy Pass and the little regional pass you've made, mm-hmm. you've responded to the market, because a skier right now who's sitting in central Massachusetts or western Massachusetts is saying, okay, well, I can buy an Epic local pass for $583, right? And I can get access to Mount Snow, Okemo, Stowe, Wildcat, Attitash, and then I can go out west. I can go to Vail. I can go to Whistler for a week. I can go to Park City. I can go to Tahoe. So you have to tell a story that's a compelling alternative to that, right? And I think you've done that, because and by the way, this is not paid journalism. This is just my opinion of Berkshire East. And I've said this many times in print. So this is not a planned plug. But you basically have a pass that's it's cheaper, right? It's $499 compared to that $583 mm-hmm. Epic local pass. And B, you're offering a different kind of experience, right? This is not Mount Snow. This is not. You're not going to have everyone in Boston skiing with you. You're going to have room. You're going to be able to get 25,000 feet of vertical if that's what you want to do on a Saturday, because you might wait in a lift line for 5 minutes, right?
Yep.
If it's a busy day. Same thing at Catamount, and you're offering them two different experiences. So if you have, maybe you have kids, you want to go to Biscay one day with the kids, because that's just like, Biscay's just a rambling little mountain.
Just go fun. Let them rip.
Yep. And then maybe one night you want to go down to Catamount, and maybe your regular is Berkshire East because it's less busy on the weekends, right? So you're providing that alternative experience to them, and they're still big enough. 1,000 vertical feet is big enough. 1,100 that you have at Berkshire East is big enough. And then you throw the Indy Pass on top of that. You have a story to tell, and that's what you have to do. It's not 1998 anymore. You have to acknowledge these big passes exist if you want to compete with them. And I think that's what skiers are telling the skier is like, look, I mean, you tell me, since Epic came into the Northeast, how have Summit Passes been doing? And I imagine
it's interesting because it actually helped us create space.
Yeah,
that makes sense. It was a more competitive market on the single pass basis with Just Peak, mm-hmm. but Epic bifurcated the market a little bit more and defined it, and it gave us some room to create the Summit Pass. Catamount being available, being a good big little mountain in the southern end of the Berkshires close to New York, that created a market, and it became very logical for us to combine those. And we have something to play against. We have a bit of a foil in the form of the Epic, and I don't I view them as acting in the best interests of themselves. I have no real gripe with Vail Resorts, and, you know, I respect them for the work they've done, but it's helped us to tell the story that you're talking about. And the other story that's been created, and I think it's great, you know, 4 years ago, I had a conversation with the CEO of a company that sold a lot of lift tickets online. This was a year and a half before the Indy Pass came out, and we were talking about the rise of multiple pass programs. And he said, you know, well, you can't take a collection of sea level mountains in the United States and come up with a new pass name and expect to sell any. You know, it's just go tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and you define those tiers to me. And so we were debating the role of tickets versus passes. Then, you know, a year and a half later, the rumblings of the Indy Pass come out. And I think that the concept of Indy and independent really put a brand, I think it's brilliant, and a name to the mountains like us, which, you know, we are smaller. We don't have the infrastructure, but we have intrinsic qualities that are attractive to people as well. And it's been a really important part of our growth over the last 2 or 3 years, is to have this pass, to have a foil to work against, and it helps tell our story better. So, you know, it's become more of a, you know, it's not symbiotic or parasitic or any sort of relationship like that, but, you know, we know our market better because of having those mega passes to work with.
What do you think potential of the summit passes, Jon? Could you see this thing growing to add more mountains either north of you or within Massachusetts?
Potentially, you know, with the right partner or partnership. You know, we do a lot of sausage making behind the scenes, and the day in the life of the ski area owner starts at about 5 a.m. and I start fielding phone calls from family members as soon as 6. So then we talk about things, and a lot of the ideas that we settle on have been vetted and gone round and round in conversations in our close-knit community, you know, for months or years or decades even. And so, yeah, there's ways to expand it. I think it would be beneficial, but I also think the Indy Pass is an extension of our Summit Pass because it's such an affordable upgrade, and that what you're suggesting is some sort of, the way I would look at it, the ideal partner would be aspirational partner. So you can, what defines the Summit Pass? Well, Berkshire East and Catamount, they're nice local mountains. Well, to a particular skier base, those are the mountains they're most likely to ski. You know, they're proximate to their home. It's an easy commute. You don't have to spend the night. You don't have to plan a week-long trip to get there. All great things for folks if they can pull it off. But if you just want your kids to ski in the afternoon or take a quick day trip without being hounded by lines, they're great mountains on a great value, and they're places you're likely to ski. I determine an aspirational partner as somebody that you can go take a week-long vacation to. So creating and defining that partner and merging it would be great, but the Indy Pass does that for us to a degree. It's you know, there's limitations to its capacity, but that sort of check that box for us for a period of time, though I won't, you know, there's a lot of sausage making detritus, you know, around every phone conversation. So I'm not going to lie, we haven't kicked around ideas to try to integrate more places into the package.
The unclaimed resort in the Northeast that immediately springs to mind as fitting the criteria you just outlined would be Smugglers Notch. Because they're so good for families. It's an interesting mountain. It's big. It gets a ton of snow, and they have a big bed base. And they're not affiliated with any other pass right now. Yeah.
It's a good point. You maybe we'll have to exchange some digits with the the Smugglers Notch management team when you get off the phone. It's actually a mountain I haven't really looked at, to be honest with you, but they are a compelling partner. I do have my hands full. You know, we're on the verge of some massive expansions at both mountains, as well as helping to consult with Biscay and Hermitage. So it would have to be the right partner and the right integration. But yeah, we're certainly looking at it.
You know, you bring up Biscay and Hermitage, and I'm really curious about both of those, because talk about having your hands full. Last summer, you're adapting to the pandemic, preparing for operations at Berkshire East and Catamount. Then and you're doing goggles for docks, which is a whole other thing. And we did a whole podcast about that, and that we got a lot of attention, rightfully so. And then in the midst of all that, I find out you're coming on to consult at Biscay.
Yep.
And Kevin, one of your longtime employees, as I understand it, gets the GM job over there, and you take on the role at Hermitage Club. So, you know, how did you find the capacity, or why were these compelling enough opportunities to grab some of that limited attention that you have in the middle of pandemic preparation, the middle of goggles for docks? Like, how did you end up being involved with Biscay and Hermitage Club, kind of at the same time?
We've been taught, honestly, I wanted to buy the 6-pack from the Hermitage.
For Berkshire?
For somewhere, yeah. And so we got talking to him and became close with the group. I mean, I wouldn't say that we were storming right in to stake our claim on it, but we became friendly with the group that was the primary, probably going to end up with it, and ultimately did it at auction. And we formed a partnership to help advise them. So we're industry insiders. The Hermitage ran, big mountain budgets on a small mountain infrastructure. So no matter how nice your lodge is or how fancy the lift is, if you have operating constraints, you have to stay within those means. And I'm not going to relitigate or retell the Hermitage story, but it ended up in bankruptcy. And those are big mountain needs, big mountain clientele in a small New England mountain that has a budget much more similar to, say, Berkshire East or Catamount than a, Vail Mountain property. So however odd that may have seemed, we worked out a deal, and I've worked diligently on behalf of them ever since. And, our first year there was very successful. I think people are happy. Membership's growing leaps and bounds, and confidence in the model is there. So I think we've tapped into something. Biscay was very similar. Both of those needs came out of, or both of those jobs essentially came out of the pandemic. We're sitting, if you're in my shoes and you're a tourism company and it's February, 27th, the world feels like it's ending and you don't know if you're going on lockdown. You start looking for side gigs to make sure your business stays alive and that you can keep employing your customers. At the same time, when there's massive disruptions, I'm a bit of a history geek and I read a lot. You have a chance to shake out of your industry norm or your personal norm. So I'm going to say we were trying to be opportunistic, but we planned on working our butts off during the pandemic to see if we could level up, in air quotes, and just do the best we could for our businesses, our employees, and our customer base. And, the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, I was looking to try to make vegetables in our lodges. Food supply seemed disrupted. I was looking at mask technology to see if we could produce masks, and we settled on goggles, but I knew I was going to do something. And that same intensity just carried on for the next 12 months. And now I'm tired.
What's that?
And now I'm tired. But, we continue.
So what is it that you provide to Biscay and Hermitage Club? Because Bill Bennion, the GM at Hermitage Club, he was on the podcast. This is a guy who's been running Scariest for decades, and he ran Mountain Creek for a long time, which is not an easy ski area to run because of the crowds and also because the weather just is terrible, and you get meltouts and snowstorms end in rainstorms, and you need to really be good at snowmaking. So obviously that's a guy who knows what he's doing. So how do you complement that, and what's the expertise and capabilities you bring in?
Finding Bill. right?
Yeah.
There was a period of time at the Hermitage pre-Bill Benyon. And Bill and I work very closely. You know, I'll talk to him several times a day. I'm a foil to his ideas, and he's a foil to mine. I work with the board. I help educate the board. I respond to their needs as needed. Research projects, budgeting, just general advice and strategy. And so I also have an employee base and you know, a contractor base around me with lifelong connections. And so the Hermitage is very close by. We're able to meet a lot of their needs. And similarly to Biscay, you know, Biscay a year ago, I didn't even know was being sold. Within a month, I was walking it with the head of SMI and some of the Milltown Capital core individuals, and we were making a plan on how to resuscitate that thing. And you know, in some ways, they bought raw land and had to build a ski area on it because it was a soup to nuts rebuild. And so, you know, attempting to rehabilitate Biscay from say August through December, we stripped the pump room down to bare earth. We put in a mega pumping system, you know, all computer controlled, had to run pipelines across the road with traffic going. There was 2 or 3, I mean, gas lines running through the base area. So we had to deal with the gas company and easements, and the power was a mess. I mean, the thing was running on a 1940s sub generator. Thing was the size of my pickup. And so to get that thing connected to the power grid, stripped out, replace a lift, take out 2 lifts, all without help because the nation's on a lockdown, and getting it to function this year was, you know, it was a huge commitment by the company that owns it. It was a huge commitment on the local contractors that executed, and I was just sitting there helping them plan and execute along the way.
What you just described is so typical Jon Schaefer, like the way that you just move fast. And that was crystallized when that triple chair, which I imagine you had something to do with that coming down from Hermitage Club.
Yep.
And you can fill us in on that in a minute. But when I saw that, first of all, Biscay got a late start because it was just warm.
Yep.
And, you know, they were bringing them out online. And then the triple chair, there was some kind of engineering. It was very vague on the site. It was engineering challenges.
I
was like, all right, that thing's done.
You know,
and you made it happen. How?
Yeah.
Tell us the story.
We had to re-pour, you know, over half of the concrete piers on the lift in mid-January last year for whatever reason. And it was honestly like some of the lowest 48 hours of my life. You know, it was just, we'd done all this work and then to find out we had to redo it all again. And, you know, we had the oh no meeting. And in the middle of the meeting, you know, I pulled to the side and started working on the solution. And then a few of the people who ended up being key players in it, you know, a consulting lawyer, you know, the chief legal advisor for a major local corporation, he came over and we just started working through the ultimate solution, and didn't let up for 30 days, you know, and we were able to do 2 or 3 months worth of work in what seemed like 2 weeks. You know, we had 1 week to do the holes in the concrete piers. We had the firm that did the concrete for the Tappan Zee Bridge and does mega projects all over the world make up a specialty mix. We had engineers, we had oversight, we had state representatives, and it was just a massive collaboration. So how did it get done? It didn't get done by me. It got done by a team of people that I was part of. And it was a 24-hour-a-day operation, which I don't want to revisit, and I probably have PTSD from, but it was crazy. You know, you're hauling hauling concrete trucks up the hill in the middle of the winter. They're sliding sideways. You're building roads. You're getting specialty claws to fit on excavators and cranes. And, you know, it was the team of people assembled really executed the impossible, even though, you know, little old Biscay, it was quite an effort to pull it off.
You have a lot of experience doing this. If you look at Berkshire, you have at least 2 used lifts on that mountain, and maybe more. When I talk to other operators who don't have that experience or those connections or resources, when I talk to the owners of Plattekill, it took them 3 years once they bought a used double from Bel Air to replace their T-bar. It took them 3 years to put that in. You see magic is going on year 3 of getting that blackline quad in place. How much did that experience and of doing this, you know, over the decades and watching your dad do it, and the connections you have throughout the community, how much did that play into you being able to just knock this out in what, like, as an observer, I was like, there's no way they're getting this thing online this year. And of course you did.
Yeah.
But how much did all of that experience and connections play into
It's like sense of smell at this point, you know. It's 100%, you know, due to, you know, whatever has been given to me through my contacts and friends of the industry and friends of my family. And fortunately, you know, I think that I've worked hard to build on those relationships and to build loyalty amongst my staff and friends. And I call my, you know, coworkers in the industry friends, and we just, you know, just make an effort and drive hard to get it done. So there's a good community connection, and there's a healthy dose of work ethic that all mix in together to try to just persevere and stick to our commitments.
Was there a point where the Milltown folks who are not experienced scary operators, was there a point when they were like, Jon, what are we doing here? Like this is, we've gotten into this mess. We bought this chairlift. It's not working. You know, we're bringing in, you know, armies to fix it. Was there a moment when they felt like they were in over their heads, or were just kind of?
Yeah, I mean, we were in alignment, you know. Yeah. I think everybody had a moment of self-doubt, but that was fleeting, and we made a decision. We looked each other in the eye and we plowed ahead and got the job done. And, you know, it was a tough period of time, but we worked through it. And, you know, it's one of these things where it'll be a fun story in 2 years, you know, or 6 days from now or whatever. But when you're living it, it's just like, oh man, what are we doing? But, you know, at the same time, however challenging those are, we do live blessed lives here, and we're very fortunate with what we have. And so, you know, to be able to execute and to be able to be part of the fix is equally as much, you know, the reward for me. And I think the mill towns and the people who have made a commitment to our small towns here in Western Massachusetts. So, you know, I'm not going to say, you know, be totally cliche, but, you know, getting there is half the fun. So we never really back down from the challenge.
And it pretty much as soon as the lift shut off, they knocked down that lodge. So they're still moving over there.
Yeah, they're building a lodge, doing a mega snowmaking improvement. I think it'll have the best snowmaking system pound for pound, at least in southern New England. You know, they're on 50 so acres, and it's going to be largely new and updated. Mm-hmm. Great plans, great partner in SMI. Ian Honey, who has been part of 4 or 5 Olympic venue creations in terms of the snowmaking, was on site all last summer. He's a huge part of getting it done. He comes in on the 24th, and that's going to have a great system. That place will be unrecognizable 6 months from now.
Do you think we'll see Biscay on Indy and the Indy Pass?
It's a good question. There's reasons to do it and there's reasons not to do it. I think you're going to see them maybe as part of the upsell. I don't know if they'll be part of the full-time program. Okay.
How about Summit Pass holders get 1 day a year at Hermitage Club? Jon, what do you think about that?
I'm not at the board. on to the board. The board took on a lot of risk, and they have a particular model, and they're sticking to it.
Yeah, I think that proposal will probably be DOA, but
I used to ski haystack.
Yeah.
Lots of people. That mountain has fond memories for the valley, and lots of skiers in southern New England.
Yeah, I got to talk Bill into doing a media day.
Yeah, TBD. Post COVID, I think we'll be able to have more flexibility. When you're talking about a private club with uncertain times, uncertain travel restrictions, we had to keep it pretty close to the vest this winter. And there was not a lot of flexibility in the guest policy, but I think that'll loosen up in time.
One other, while we're talking about growth in Summit Pass, and I've bothered you about this before, I want to ask you again. So you've done a lot to change Massachusetts skiing and sort of modernize it, and especially in the way that you've combined Catamount, Berkshire East, and Biscay Pass. But in some ways, it's slipping away. You only have about a dozen ski areas left, and Blandford went out of business last year. I asked you if you had any interest in buying that. You said no. Why is that not? Because it is still an intact ski area. Why would that not? Tell us why that wouldn't work.
And Blandford is currently, it's like a football player currently under the control of another team. So Blandford is owned by Butternut, and we did sort of scratch the expansion itch, or that's where it started, because before Butternut bought it, we did quite an exercise on sort of assuming control out of the its the former nonprofit that ran it. Butternut stepped in and saved the day. 6 months later, we end up at Catamount. So things could have ended up quite differently.
Yeah.
I'm not certain what the future of Blandford is. We view the sort of the frontline small ski areas as really critical to the sport. So I call frontline, Blandford's, Butternuts, Otis, Catamount, the mountains in Connecticut. But the truth is some of those mountains, and I'm not associating any of those mountains with names, they've been operating, and they need significant capital investment. And so we've been able to achieve that with our mountains. I don't know how much else we're able to do in that market with the operating conditions that we have.
Yeah, it would be, I guess, like what you did at Biscay, which is basically just completely start over. You break it down to the studs and
yeah, it needs that. Yeah, to be direct. And I know the people that were there at Butternut did a great job with it. I'd be remiss to say anything about their business strategy or what they're doing with it, because I think you put a press release saying that it was, COVID related, and they were just winding down operations there. So it's in some form of mothball. Honestly, I wish them the best, but I have no insight as to what's going on.
So is expansion on your mind at all? Like if another independent ski area within a few hours of you came on the market, would you look at that and consider it?
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, we'd have to take a look. We're also highly focused on our own customers, so this year for us is all about retention of people. The COVID travel restrictions disrupted everybody's travel plans. So people ski Berkshire East who'd never been to Berkshire East before. People skied Butternut who'd never been to Butternut before. So our way to try to retain people isn't through fancy imagery or just general marketing spend. We're building lifts and we're cutting new trails. So we're highly engaged in making sure that our customer base knows that it's being taken care of. There's additional crowds. There was lines generated from, decreased capacity of ski lifts and, lack of lodge space. We're attacking those problems this year at both mountains. So Catamount's getting 2 new lifts, which will help a lot with uphill capacity, 2 quads, fixed script, And Berkshire East is probably getting a triple, or we're still working the final details of that right now, and 4 new trails. So it's hard to go out and try to tackle another one of these things.
Yeah.
And it's not only capital, but also finding the right people. I think we've worked very hard to form a great team of, let's just call it the next generation of industry leaders. I'm very confident in the people that operate for us, but to go out and to contemplate taking down a whole other industry or a whole other mountain in the industry, and then staffing it with like-minded people, it's a lot. And then getting to know that customer base. So I think that we would be very specific and targeted if we were to do that. But the Biscay partnership works very well because you have people invested in that community that look to us for advice and assistance in terms of operating. So, we'll just see.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about the lifts at Catamount and Berkshire East. Are these new lifts or are they used lifts? Or have you not decided yet?
Refurbished. It's your certified used GMC vehicle, essentially, of the ski lift world. So the parts and pieces will all be gone through. They'll be modernized where needed, but they'll be reused fixed lift lifts, which is the best value in the market right now.
Right.
We took a lift from Holiday Valley,
oh, nice.
The Yodeler, so that will be going in at Catamount. And then we have another lift that we put together last summer with various pieces from across the Northeast and parts that we had. It's essentially a fixed grip Palma quad that will replace the double that was to the far right of the mountain. That lift work is starting now. And our goal is to declutter the base area, reorganize the base area for better throughput and traffic, as well as to put more people in the air going uphill, so it decreases clutter across the mountain. So we're getting there. We added a tubing park at Catamount, did a massive upgrade to the snowmaking system, clearing some tree lines out. And then at Berkshire East, we have a whole new expansion and lift line to the northeast of the mountain over here, which will really be the first new aspect of the mountain cut in 50 years. So return visitors to Berkshire East once this is completed, it's going to be the biggest ski area in Massachusetts. I think it's going to be pretty darn cool. It's going to ski great. It's intermediate type terrain with beginners as well as some very steep sections. But again, the aspects, Berkshire East generally faces northwest. This fort faces northeast, and the bottom terminal is just above the Deerfield River. So the views will be very beautiful. It'll hold snow well based on which way it faces. And we hope and plan to integrate glades and, nice aesthetics throughout the whole development.
Where's that triple coming from?
That's a new drive. We're sourcing the drive now, in parts out of a lift we bought from Canada a few years ago. So the line gear, which are the towers and chairs, are a Palma that came from a defunct club north of Toronto.
And the Franken lift over at Catamount, was that
West Mountain Terminal? The terminal, I don't know if it was ever used, but that was a Sugarbush quad.
Okay.
Originally, and then the Yodeler.
Okay, nice.
Bought the towers out of the West last summer. We tried to get that lift in last year, but we got into October and I don't mind trying to make the impossible happen, but that just would have been a disaster if we had attempted. So
not as critical a situation as you had at Biscay. You said something really interesting to me a while back about glading at Berkshire East and Catamount and the potential to dramatically expand that for a very almost negligible price. Is that something that you can talk about?
Yeah, a little bit. We haven't officially committed, but there are glading firms out there that do tremendous work. They did visit Berkshire East and Catamount last year, and we made some improvements. But it's something that, over time, you're going to see us engage wholeheartedly on. It's like anything. When you introduce something new, you have to manage it properly. And making sure our expanded glade systems are managed and, are effectively advertised and treated are important. But for me, there's a freedom to choose when you go skiing, right? You can go left, you can go right, you can go fast, you can go slow, and a freedom to explore the trees and the woods. And it's fun. We like to engage. It's the fun and happy business.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my critiques of the sport in general, and this isn't just in direct reference to glades, is that sometimes it seems so restrictive, and you get away from that freedom of movement and freedom of choice. And, you got to park way over here, and you got to get on a bus, and then you're ferried through lines, and you can't do this and you can't do that. And the glades and other aspects of our business represent, maybe pushing back against those concepts of just ferreting people through cattle yards to get to the lift. And so, yeah, you're going to see us do that. You're going to see us do a lot more as well.
It's one of the things that drew me to Berkshire East is, for me, I care less about a mountain being big than being interesting.
Yeah.
I want to have an experience that's challenging, that's memorable, that's not just, going back and forth down a groomed run, because that's fine for a couple runs, but then I want, a little bit of having to think on my feet, and the glades really give you that. And that's what we're missing the most in the Northeast. And this goes back to your question earlier: what are customers trying to tell operators they're missing? I think skiers want variety. If you go to Okemo, I don't mind calling them mountains. They have 100 trails, but they're all the same.
Yeah.
What's the point? They groom every one. They hardly ever open the glades. The customers now, especially because it's so easy to scale west and you see the different culture and what it's like out there. And I understand we have a lot of freestyle in the Northeast, and sometimes you can't do that. But they want some interesting stuff, some bumps, some blades. And this idea of kind of just opening the whole mountain is so compelling to me. You have some mountains. I went to Elk Mountain in Pennsylvania. It's a great hill. It's not widely known, but it's the best ski area in Pennsylvania. It doesn't even feel like Pennsylvania. But they have signs all over. Do not ski in the trees. And it is such a drag, because I was there on a powder day. You have trees all over the place. Clearly people poach them, but you'll get tossed for skiing them. And that is such an antiquated attitude. I don't understand it. You're scaring off a big potential demographic.
Yeah, I agree. And you see the rise, one of the fastest growing segments of the sport are uphill skiers. It's that fitness, it's a little bit of freedom, a little time away. He's at Berkshire East. We've engaged for a long time on the uphill skiing. And now there's whole families that organize around, the wife goes with her friends up the mountain, the husband watches the kids in the bunny slope, and then vice versa. And part of that is the backcountry world where, people just want to go out and do their own thing and hammer around, but you're somewhat restricted in the East Coast. But giving people access and targeting those little groups of people, everybody's in their own little marketing and funnel. How do you end up at Berkshire East? And I try not to be the fun police. We've talked about doing ice climbing walls and having little micro festivals to try to bring in 40 or 50 people. My brother Jim says it. You're in, Shawshank Redemption. It's, you hide a little bit of dirt in your pockets, and every day you walk to the parking lot, and before you know it, you've dug yourself out of a prison, 30 years later. And finding new customers for Berkshire East is, it's 40 here, it's 30 here, it's 100 there. So we're engaging at a really, personal level, or at least I like to think we are. And so, making sure you have glades, making sure you have uphill access routes, making sure you have this and that are all become really critical. And before you know it, you've expanded your skier base.
Has Indy Pass helped with that, Jon? Doug Fish told me on the podcast a while ago that 90% of the visitors to Pat's Peak were first-time visitors to that mountain.
Wow.
Who've never heard of it. Are you seeing numbers like that, where a lot of people who hadn't heard of Berkshire East just are trying it, or Catamount?
Indy Pass is stronger for Berkshire. Mm-hmm. I think somehow we've put Berkshire East more into the folklore and the, we've created some sort of vibe that's very attractive to people. Catamount seems to be a bit more mainstream, and less of that Indy vibe. So there's less visits to go there, which actually kind of surprises me. Berkshire East Indy has introduced us to a lot of new customers. You see us in some top 10 lists. I think 2 years ago, we might've been third or fourth in the country. This year, we slipped back a little bit. There's some heavyweights coming on, but it's, again, and it's also part of the story, writing the story of what is an Indy mountain? What is the term Indy? It's not Berkshire East or Brundage or Lutsen as people that just aren't in the big pass club. We actually are a thing in and of itself that can appeal to people with our own intrinsic value. And Indy is helped us tell that story to a whole new group of people. And back to the industry press, I mean, it's been really helpful in the mainstream press level as well.
And do you find that those folks who come and try it end up staying, or maybe even convert to Summit Pass?
Honestly, we haven't tracked it that much. We're converting a lot of new people, but very specific people. The Berkshire East customer that sticks, and Catamount as well, they come to us and they look around, they go, "Oh, thank God I'm here." And then a lot of people we're not the place for. People want things that we don't have. You go to Stowe, you go to Killington, and there's a lot that appeals to people at those mountains. Different restaurants, dining experiences, après experiences. I think that, a lot of folks who end up at our mountains are multi-generational skiers. They had ties either through a family cabin or a ski club to, say, some other resort, and they are trying to reach back in time because they've got little kids, and they go back to the 80s when they were a kid, and they remember, the non-corporatized version of that mountain, which was their childhood. And the snow was always deeper, and there's all the things you sort of misremember about your childhood, but you go back to that place now and you're just disconnected from those memories. And I think a lot of people are unsettled about that, and it's not fun. But then you come back to these throwback type mountains where I think we've tried to stay true to our roots as well as, modernize. And for the right person, you come into one of our resorts and it's like, it feels closer to home, and you feel immediately tied to that community. So any exposure to a new customer base is good. But people self-select when they buy the Indy pass. It takes a particular person to buy that pass versus a, Epic pass, for example. So, maybe it's directed at a higher rate of than you otherwise may have expected, into converting to seasons pass or frequent ticket holders.
So you were one of the first to sign on in the East to the Indy Pass, and you're sticking with it for a third year here. And the yields came in a little bit lower than what Indy Pass had hoped, as far as per visit payout this year. But every partner returned. Why do you think that is? Like, what is it from the point of view of you as an operator? Why is Indy Pass so appealing, and why are people sticking with it and continuing to join it? And now we see big mountains too, like Powder Mountain that just signed on, and Saddleback, Waterville Valley, J Peak. Why is this thing catching so much momentum, even though they're still figuring it out and they don't always get everything right from what their goals are as far as the revenue goes?
It's a painless, like I said, you have the in club and the out club in terms of, Berkshire East 5 years ago was out of Icon, out of Epic, out of Mountain Collective. And so it allows us to have our own little, group. And it's a pretty painless group to join, as an operator. And it provides a lot of value, tremendous value to our pass holders in terms of the upsell. So $189 on top of your base pass, plus we've got the Summit Pass. Now you've got aspirational trips you can take on top of your Berkshire East Pass, or Catamount Pass. So it makes a ton of sense for a mountain like us to be part of it and to maintain it. There's other opportunities to join passes. I really like the independent streak of the Indy pass, you know, not to be redundant, but there's an us against the world mentality, I think, out of the owners that are here. We view the world, the ski world, the same way. You know, I'm excited to see the film that was done about all these resorts this year with TGR. And I think some of that, a little bit more of that story will come out, and it taps us into a national audience that we otherwise wouldn't have. So
Berkshire was one of those, right?
Yeah, Berkshire East. It was the first day of filming, and you know, 50 degrees and sunny like it is every day at Berkshire East, with tons of snow in the woods. And then it started raining immediately after they left our property. So
Are we going to see some Jon Schaefer ski footage in that film?
Oh yeah, I think I'm yeah. I think I'll get a residual for how good I was skiing in the middle of all that.
Yeah. Did they bring their own athletes, or were they just skiing whoever was there?
Locals.
Nice.
So there was some debate around bringing an athlete or not. And they ended up just embedding with the local community. They sent some pretty significant film makers. I forget the name of the producer, but he is a globally known producer. He's done films for adventure sports films that are on Netflix and all major platforms. And then Dustin Lindgren, his brother's Scott Lindgren is one of the, you know, most famous kayakers on the planet. Done a ton of first descents and really inspired a generation of people. So Dustin was on site, and he was in charge of filming and the film crew. And I'm pretty psyched to see what they ended up capturing.
Nice. And did you help them identify those local skiers? Say, hey, these are the 5 guys that go the hardest here.
Yeah. It was a mix of finding local color. So, you know, all these little towns have their own personalities. Yeah. And then we tried to expose them to a good cross section. One day they skied with an 82-year-old female. Nice. And Berkshire has produced some good skiers. We had one guy who used to be on the development team, a great collegiate skier. He skied with us for a day. His daughter. I don't know. I didn't really actually make it. I wanted it to be a good representation of our core customer. So I didn't really push hard to find awesome skiers. It didn't seem right. I just wanted the locals showing off.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, you know, who knows, maybe we'll look like a bunch of awkward teenagers, you know. I should have gone and gotten a World Cup skier, but you know, it's okay.
I think they wanted to capture the vibe of the place.
Yeah, that's what we were going for. So
when's that dropping, fall?
I think so, yeah.
Nice. All right.
So I got a couple of questions for you just to wrap it up on. And it's mainly my own project here, if that's all right.
Sure.
I'm logged out of my computer. Hold on a sec. I really appreciate it all. So here we go, the 5 speed round questions.
All right.
Best COVID innovation that won't leave the ski world.
In skiing specifically?
Yep.
E-commerce. Just everything shifting to online and becoming easier for guests and for resorts, I think.
Okay. Don't give it up. We actually hit this one. You answered the question of what is the guest trying to tell us? Mm-hmm. But what don't ski areas understand about the market? So on one hand, what's the guest asking for? You said passes. But where do ski areas just sort of fall flat? We offer a product, we get so involved in our construction projects and what we think is right, but we're missing something.
Yeah, it's pass innovation, it's terrain innovation, and it's communication about those things. If you want to know what I think is the template for how an independent ski area should become relevant, you look at Magic Mountain. Jeff Hathaway has told a story that people want to be a part of. Magic is, it's great. But a lot of people oversell it, and that's because they bought into what Jeff's saying, and he's done an awesome job. He's built a story that people want to go there, and he said this is the alternative to the Mega Pass, and people are all on board. And he's on social. He sends out a newsletter that's really good on a regular basis, and his Alpine Update emails, which everyone should subscribe to. And he admits when he makes a mistake. He admits when Magic makes a mistake. He admits when things are hard. He's transparent. A lot of ski areas aren't doing that. Their social media either doesn't exist, or it's very it's a great powder day. Like, who cares? It's tell us something, make us connect with you. And Jeff is doing an awesome job of that, Magic.
Okay, so self-servingly, what should I do better? Berkshire East Catamount.
I think get on that Glade project selfishly. That's what I want to see. I think you guys have a lot of opportunities in social. I think your social is really limited, and I think that like, okay, so let me tell you something that you did really well that I think you should do a lot more of. That note that you put out at the end of the season was awesome. It said, look, this was a really hard season. Our e-commerce system sucked. Sorry, we're going to make it better. Yep. We're putting in 2 new lifts at Catamount, a new lift at Berkshire East. In other words, you're telling skiers what they want a ski area operator to tell them, right? So they know, like, these are places, these are skiers' mountains. You have an opportunity to do a lot more of that, because your social there's not a lot of social coming out of Berkshire East. There's not a lot coming out of Catamount. These are places that people really love. And I think that you have a chance to build that sort of online momentum that Jeff has built up at Magic with not much more effort. You already have the tools. You know what to do. You know what to say. You're already doing it all. It's just a matter of talking about it more. Yeah,
that's a good point. And I feel that too. That's one of my goals over the next year or so. I used to write a blog. And I this was in 2012, 13, 14. And I knew it became relevant, which when one day I started to get tired, this lasted for 4 or 5 years. And I used to write about every snowstorm, similar to what you did. And I don't know, I'm not the worst writer ever, but I'm not the best. But I got this angry email saying that I didn't write the blog, and she didn't know there was going to be a snow day, and didn't plan for her kids to be home from school. And it was getting a lot of views, tens of, like, literally 10,000 or whatever.
Oh, wow.
Man. But then the wheels came off the bus. And I know one of my jobs is to communicate. And it's just really hard. It's discipline to get out in front of people. And I try to write with passion. And sometimes it's hard to write with just information, if that makes sense. So I just need to capture that a little bit better. Who is the voice of the industry? I.e., what segment right now is the most powerful?
Well, I'll tell you, it's definitely not the media, because there's not much there. I hope that changes, and I hope it grows. And with Powder Magazine going down, that was a big deal. I think, unfortunately, the voice of skiing right now is Facebook, and it's these Facebook groups. That's where the most conversation is happening, and that's where the most opinions are being formed. That's where the most opinionated people are. That's for skiers. If you're asking about the industry,
no, that's fine.
You have Facebook has really done a good job of creating a very powerful mechanism for like-minded people to unite. Because 15 years ago, if I wanted to talk about Berkshire East, I didn't know anyone else who knew about that place, down in New York City. It's maybe here and there, but most people were skiing out west, or they'd go to Hunter, right? And now I can find 500 people right away. Like your podcast was one of the most popular ones that I did with you, because there was an appetite for it, right? People
Yep.
wanted to hear from you. You have a very passionate following. So I think that Facebook's created a really powerful assembly place for skiers. And unfortunately, and the reason why this is a bad thing is because it's just such a pit of misinformation and
Yeah.
wild guesses and
Vitriol.
rumors. Yeah, it's you got to take it for what it is.
You know, and honestly, back to your last statement about being, you know, more proactive, I actually deleted my social accounts.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I made a personal decision about 2 years ago, and it's really impacted marketing. I used to do a lot of Facebook Live in a snowcat, and you know, I'm seeing this tension a lot. I one night I was doing social work, not social, but social media work at home, going through comments and responding to people, and I was neglecting my daughter, who was 4 at the time,
Yeah.
and just ignoring her. And I was like, I gotta make priorities in my life here. And that night I just hit delete on all my accounts, and I usually add them back in come October through December. But I've had to put up barriers because I now have a family. You know, if I was a bachelor running a ski area, I'd probably have cables coming out of my arms and I'd be attached to the damn thing. But now it's, you know, I got to put up walls on behalf of my family. And it is a little bit, you know, I understand, and maybe it's too, there is a little bit of performance art that I'm missing, you know, in the whole thing, but I just got to be careful there. So lastly, what's the weather going to be like next year?
It's going to snow like crazy, John. We're going to have an awesome year. You get 250 inches of snow at Berkshire East.
Never rain, right?
Yep. No rain. I will say we got that awesome run from about second week in January till the end of February when it never dipped below freezing, and it was just snowing just a little bit at a time. But that was one of the best stretches I can remember. And, I would like to see that long with an earlier start and more snow in March.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'll tell you in April. So I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I'll see you up at the mountain, and I'm looking forward to details on those projects at Catamount and Berkshire East.
Yeah, we'll give you updates soon. So I appreciate everything today. And you know what? This is a little effort to create relevant content. So I appreciate your time today.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. Always good chatting with you, John.
Cool. Thanks.
Best of luck with it. Take care. Bye.
Yep.